Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. The English Armada, not the Spanish. Hey guys, Kings and Generals, phenomenal channel. Link to the original video from Kings and Generals, top of the description. English Armada, an even worse catastrophe than the Spanish Armada. Okay. I have never... I don't even know what Armada really means. Does it mean just a navy? Like a navy, but like a word for it used centuries ago? Or does it mean like does Armada mean like a navy that is like going to war? Let's figure it out. My name's Connor. If you're new, I'm ready to learn. Let's go.
The Spanish Armada of 1588 has gone down in history as one of the largest naval invasion forces ever assembled. In the plans of King Philip II of Spain, his mighty fleet was intended to link up with his forces in Flanders and then invade England, dealing a humbling blow to Elizabeth I. But the Armada has also gone down in history as one of the worst military disasters in Spanish military history, one that would allow England to rule the waves uncontested. Or at least that's the picture painted by Elizabethan propaganda. The undeclared war between England and Spain was far from over, and the balance of power was still on Philip's side. Elizabeth would seek to redress it by launching her own invasion against Spain. This is the story of the largest English naval expedition to that date and the epic struggle that followed. This is the story of the English counter-armada. Wish you were able to field the largest invasion force ever assembled? There's a new...
Guys, please, any video I watch that has a sponsor advertisement, the original link to this video, top of the description. Please, if you're interested and you saw it here, use their promo codes and links. It's really important.
Mobile game where you can do just that, and it's the sponsor of this video, Top Troops. Massive battles await you on the path to defeat the Dark Army, but you'll need to gather a force that can fill your whole screen. How? Build your kingdom and collect troops to use, and then use the merge system to train and upgrade your units outside of battle. Since you're always upgrading your army or economy one way or the other, there's constant progression towards your goal of ultimate victory, even outside of the epic and strategic battle system. You can also join a squad to work with or compete against other players, and now's the best time to do it as this game is brand new, so you can explore the strategic challenges within together right now. Get the game on iOS or Android via our link in the description or the QR code, and you'll also get a bonus pack with 100 gems at a king chest size L, but only for a limited time. So dive in and start building your kingdom and army today.
Holes.
The Spanish Armada had left the English Channel on August 12, 1588, but Elizabeth's court still feared their return. During the doomed expedition, the Spanish had lost several ships to the English and lost most of their vessels to shipwrecks on the way home, but only a fraction of them were military ships. All in all, the Spanish fleet was still formidable and capable of striking once more against England. After repelling the Spanish invasion, Elizabeth ordered her admirals, Lord Howard and Sir Francis Drake, to strike back at once, but the command...
Guys, I always say I want to learn more about the Spanish Empire at its sort of zenith. It's most powerful, and I never get around to do it. But would you say this is where the Spanish Empire is at its most powerful at this time period?
Were Lord Howard and Sir Francis Drake to strike back at once, but the commanders were unconvinced. Despite having suffered low casualties in combat, up to half their sailors had succumbed to disease while at sea pursuing the Armada. Moreover, the English fleet was low on supplies and its coffers were woefully empty. Nevertheless, Elizabeth persisted in her desire to form a counter-armada. Soon she found an ally and supporter in Dom Antonio, Prior of Cato, a pretender to the Portuguese throne, who had been ousted by King Philip II of Spain through the union with Portugal, which some historians consider an annexation. If Elizabeth's ships helped Cato to retake Lisbon, Dom Antonio would turn Portugal into an English protectorate, including its colonial possessions in South America. By the end of September,
I don't think I knew that Spain ever had control over Portugal, because Portugal has such a big history and you know, powerful trade and... Sorry, okay.
A plan began taking shape. An English counter-armada, or more precisely a joint Anglo-Dutch expedition, was to sail to the Iberian Peninsula and accomplish 3 strategic objectives. First, destroy the remnants of the Spanish Armada, moored for refitting in Santander. Next, take Lisbon. Finally, conquer the Azores Islands to seize the Spanish ships returning from the Americas with their cargo of treasures. The leaders of the expedition were Sir Francis Drake, in charge of the fleet, and Sir John Norris, in charge of the invasion army. It was an ambitious plan, made even more so by England's lack of resources. But Drake and Norris had a solution: treat the invasion as a for-profit enterprise, opening up to private investors looking for a return in booty. At the time, the total budget for the venture was estimated at £80,000. Elizabeth I contributed 20,000 and 6 galleons. The Dutch rebels, seeking to rid themselves of the Spanish yoke, invested 10,000. The remaining 50,000 came from private investors. On April 28, 1589, the bulk counter-armada set sail from Plymouth. It consisted of 180 to 200 ships, including 60 Dutch flyboats confiscated by Drake at the last minute, and some 28,000 sailors and soldiers. Before the departure, Elizabeth gave 2 clear orders. The first was for her favourite lover, the Earl of Essex, Robert Devereux, to not join the expedition. The second was to prioritise the destruction of the Spanish Armada in Santander. Both orders were blatantly disobeyed. With the help of one of Drake's officers, Roger Williams Devereux had escaped the court to seek adventure. As for the second order, Drake decided to ignore Santander, probably expecting too strong a resistance there. He instead decided to attack Corunna on the northwestern tip of Spain, which promised to hold a rich, poorly defended booty. On May 3, 1589, the English Armada was sighted off the coast of Corunna. The city's defences were under the leadership of the Marquis of Serralbo, who could rely on 4 vessels moored in the port, the artillery batteries at the forts of Saint-Anton and Malvicin, as well as the garrison of 1,200 men, most of whom were concentrated in the lower district of Pescaderia. On May the 4th, the Spanish Empire struck back at the incoming invaders, as the roaring cannons of Saint-Anton forced 2 ships to run aground. The rest of the English fleet, however, kept out of range, and soon Sir Norris had thousands of his foot soldiers disembark on launches. The invaders took control of the roads to Santiago and Betanzo, seeking to isolate Corunna. Serralbo ordered a sortie of 150 arquebusiers under Captain de Troncoso to prevent the English from seizing the hill of Santa Lucia. Troncoso's ambush was initially successful in stalling the enemy advance, causing several losses, but his outnumbered arquebusiers were soon forced into a fighting retreat. The action had only delayed the complete encirclement of the city, which the English completed during the night. Later that night, 2 Spanish companies arrived as reinforcement from Betanzos, but found that the road to Corunna was blocked by thousands of English soldiers. The reinforcements were met by Captain Juan de Varela, a veteran of Flanders who had sortied from Corunna. When the captains from Betanzos complained that they lacked gunpowder to effectively engage the English, Varela replied, "The Spaniards' real power in times of need is the sword." And so the relief party broke through the English lines, swords drawn, engaging them in close-quarter combat and reaching Pescaderia at dawn. On the morning of the 5th, 4 launches left the formation of the English fleet, transporting a battery of 3 bronze cannons. The aim was to take them on shore and place them atop a cliff edge, thus targeting the walls of Pescaderia and the ships protecting it. 2 Spanish galleys, Diana and Princesa, moved out to intercept the launches, but after firing a few ineffective shots, they rowed away and out of sight, all the way to the port of Ferrol. Captain de Varela took the occasion to roast the commanders of the 2 galleys. If His Majesty were to give them new coats of arms for their exploits, on the border it should read, as it says in the Gospel, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall inherit the earth." A burn worthy of the Inquisition.
I don't get it. I don't get the burn. If His Majesty were to give them new...
A burn worthy of the Inquisition. Luckily for the defenders, the captains of the galleons San Juan and San Bartolome had not pawned
Can anyone explain that to me? What?
off their family jewels yet. After the English bronze cannons were put into
Family
position,
jewels.
they engaged them in a fierce artillery duel. The English battery was taken out, but both galleons were heavily damaged. The captains decided to abandon their ships, not before setting them on fire and placing barrels of gunpowder on the San Juan, a prized prey for Drake's men. As they rushed on board the flaming ship to capture her banners, the gunpowder went off,
No.
killing 15 English soldiers.
That worked. That must have been difficult because, well, kind of lucky because you had to delay it enough to get them on board.
Capture her banners, the gunpowder went off, killing 15 English soldiers. The district of Pescaderia.
Guys, imagine being in those shoes of being like, we got a Spanish ship, let's go, and like, all right, there's a little fire, let's put it out, and then being like, oh god, and seeing the gunpowder, and then too late. It probably wasn't as dramatic.
Was
It
now
might have
left
been.
without protection from the ships in harbour, and the besiegers went on the assault during the night. As the battle raged over the wall to the south, an English contingent landed on the eastern beach of Pescaderia, hitting the Spanish flank. Seralbo ordered his men to abandon the defensive positions on the wall and retreat to the better fortified High Town. As Norris's troops poured into Pescaderia, fierce street-by-street fighting ensued, until the bulk of the Spanish troops and civilians reached the High Town. Seralbo had lost 400 men in the fighting retreat, but he was now in a stronger position. On the morning of the 6th, 2,400 Spanish troops under Count Andrade arrived as reinforcements, taking position on a hill overlooking Pescaderia. Seralbo's hopes were soon dashed, however, as an English sortie drove them back decisively. In the following days, the English were busy building siege works and artillery platforms and digging tunnels to undermine the walls of the High Town. On the 11th, the besiegers bombarded one of the gates to the High Town, Puerta de Ares, and later launched a failed assault against another gate, Puerta Real. The English then proceeded to batter the walls with intense artillery fire, while the Spanish worked tirelessly to reinforce their fortifications. On the 12th, the English tunnelers detonated their first mine, close to the monastery of Santo Domingo. But the tunnel they had dug was too short, and the explosion did not damage the walls. On the 14th, the English...
I don't know why I start to pick sides. Like, I'm like, dang it. I'm like, I'm not fighting for either side. Why do I care if something succeeds or not? I don't know. It's my brain.
Sappers gave it another
Not
go,
me.
and this time their mine exploded right under the turret. Unbeknownst to them, the women of Corunna had built a solid embankment behind the fortification to reinforce it. This structure deflected the blast of the explosion back towards the besiegers, killing 300 of them.
Whoa.
Part of the turret had collapsed nonetheless.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's pretty genius. Or you're just experienced. 300 dead in that blast?
Besiegers, killing 300 of them.
That's crazy.
Part of the turret had collapsed nonetheless, and Morris's artillery had opened another breach nearby. The English
So
infantry...
did they just effectively with that counter bankment to like have a giant giant like buckshot of grape shot of just giant earthen castle just exploding that way, and
thus and Morris's artillery had opened another breach nearby. The English infantry thus launched a massed infantry attack to penetrate within the city walls, under a hail of musket balls and stones unleashed by the defenders, men, women, and even children. An English flag bearer managed to break through the wall breach, but was swiftly pierced with a pike by a civilian, Maria Pita, who, according to legend, had lost her husband due to the attackers.
whoa.
Maria's act galvanized the defenders,
Be a great
who were
movie.
able to push back the infantry assaults. Norris had lost between 500 and 600 men, while the defenders suffered 150 casualties. As the battle raged on around the turret, Norris's forces launched a parallel assault against the Saint-Anton fortress. 40 launches carrying troops and artillery tried to disembark near the castle, but the 4 cannons of Saint-Anton sunk 2 of the boats, causing the rest to retreat. On the 16th,
Was that smart?
the besiegers turned their
Okay. It's almost like, well, you were bound to maybe lose a ship or two. You lost them, and then you ran away.
Attention to the Spanish forces under Count. On the 16th, the besiegers turned their attention to the Spanish forces under Count Andrade outside of Corunna, who had been harassing them from the rear. Norris dispatched a large column towards the bridge of El Burgo, but Andrade had already prepared an ambush with 100 arquebusiers. As the English started crossing the narrow bridge, they were first picked off by arquebus fire and then pushed back by the charging Spaniards, sword in hand. Norris ordered a second, larger attack, and this time his troops managed to cross the bridge. A second charge, led personally by Andrade, pushed them back once more. The third time was the charm, as the English returned with their best armed and trained soldiers at the front. Realizing he was hopelessly outnumbered and outmatched, Andrade ordered for his men, mostly untrained militia, to abandon the battlefield. Norris had thus secured his rear, but this Pyrrhic victory had cost him up to 300 soldiers against 36 lost by Andrade.
Question, guys. Was the Spanish Empire ever as dominant as the British Empire was? Or maybe, okay, forget that. Forget that question, actually, because even if they weren't, they could still. Were they ever a superpower? Like undoubtedly, like if you mess with them one-on-one, you will lose. Clearly, with the Spanish Armada, didn't work out very great. But maybe before this time, maybe a few decades prior to this, maybe they were stronger. And if so, were they the first superpower of the gunpowder age? Like, were they the first giant superpower force that wielded significant amounts of gunpowder weaponry in their army?
Outmatched.
Anyone know?
To 300 soldiers against 36 lost by Andrade. Over the 17th and 18th of May, the besiegers attempted 2 incendiary attacks against the walls of the high town, but were repulsed on both occasions. After setting fire to the monastery of Santo Domingo and part of Pescaderia, Norris and Drake decided to leave Corunna and finally head towards one of their main planned strategic objectives, Lisbon. On the 19th, the English fleet set sail to Portugal, having left behind 1,500 casualties. By the 25th, it laid anchor in the Bay of Peniche, 70 kilometers north of Lisbon, where a war council was held to decide the best strategy of attack. Drake and Norris decided to split their forces. Part of the army, under Norris and Dom Antonio, would disembark at Peniche and then march towards Lisbon. Dom Antonio promised that along the way, he would be able to recruit local forces loyal to his cause. At the same time, Drake was to enter the estuary of the river Tagus and attack the Portuguese city with his fleet. On May 26th, Norris's group began their amphibious operation. The bulk of the troops were preceded by Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, who, thirsty for glory, led 2,000 men on barges on Consolaçao Beach. After losing 80 men to the crashing waves, the young Earl of Essex had a taste of victory. A small Spanish contingent charged at his troops 3 times, before conceding defeat and retreating inland. Devereux's action cleared the way for Norris and Dom Antonio to land with 12,000 troops. The triumphant pretender to the throne was crowned King of Portugal in Peniche, but soon it became clear that locals were not exactly clamoring to join his ranks. Despite him bearing promises of independence from Spain, his alliance with England was seen with distrust by the locals. Nonetheless, on May 28th, Norris and Antonio set off for Lisbon. Along the way, they did not encounter strong resistance, but their journey was not a triumphal parade either. The Spanish commander, the Count of Fuentes, had ordered his cavalry to harass the invading troops, picking them off at will before quickly retreating. At the same time, the Spanish and Portuguese defenders had emptied supply stores along the way, leaving the invaders starved and exhausted when they finally reached Loures, 10 kilometers north of Lisbon, on May 30th. On the night of May 31st, 200 Spanish arquebusiers, musketeers, and horsemen under Captain de Torres approached the English camp at night. They shouted, "Long live Dom Antonio," to pass as Portuguese defectors. This confused the guards, which let them infiltrate the camp. Nobody expects the Spanish infiltration, and de Torres' men were able to inflict more than 200 casualties before pulling out.
Ow. be this would be just a great movie script. It's all here, like just all of it.
While Drake had an easier time, having reached the port of Cascais on the 29th. From there, he directly controlled the Tagus estuary, and thus could intercept supplies reaching Lisbon by sea. In the following days, Norris's columns recovered from the surprise attack and descended upon the city, entrenching themselves in the unfortified suburb of Saldanha. The stage was set for a two-pronged attack on Lisbon, Norris from land and Drake from the sea. Similarly, the Iberian land forces, some 5,000 men, were led by Archduke Albert of Habsburg, Viceroy of Portugal, while the fleet was under Don Alonso de Bazan. The first assault on the city, however, was conducted by Dom Antonio of Crato. The pretender to the throne had managed to send a letter to a loyalist within Lisbon's wall, Rhode Lobo, described by a chronicle of the time as noble by birth but not by habit. On the night of the 2nd, Dias Lobo visited the convent of the Trinity, built against the city walls, to convince the friars to open Lisbon's gates for Dom Antonio and his allies. The friars welcomed him to a hearty dinner, while two of them went to fetch the guards. As the traitor was arrested, he probably realized that seeking help from Catholic friars to facilitate a Protestant invasion wasn't exactly a genius move. At dawn on June 3rd, Norris ordered the first proper assault. His troops stormed out of the trenches and moved southwards, towards the city walls, but suffered heavy casualties from marksmen atop the walls and de Bazan's galleys stationed in the estuary. The English retreated into their trenches, while Archduke Alberto ordered a large sortie. 3 columns of arquebusiers, pikemen and cavalry filed out of Lisbon, totaling 1,100 men. The larger column circumvented the English trenches undisturbed, and then attacked from the north, while 2 smaller detachments hit their eastern flank. The attackers initially had the upper hand, breaking through 6 English trenches. As the Iberians encroached on the besiegers, who had now become the besieged, the tides turned. The Spanish cavalry had no room to maneuver in the narrow streets of Saldanha, and many horsemen fell to English fire. The cavalry withdrew hastily, knocking down their own compatriots on foot. The English counterattack drove the sortie party back into Lisbon, but Norris left on the ground over 200 casualties against only 25 Iberian losses. At this stage, Norris took stock of the impossibility of taking Lisbon with an army weakened by disease, starvation, and lack of effective artillery. After midnight on June 5th, Norris ordered his troops...
Yeah, if a sortie out of Lisbon can do that much damage to you, and so much one-sided damage, then you being the one attacking Lisbon, it doesn't look very great for you.
To set the campfire...
Probably a really big morale killer was that attack from Lisbon. More than just a one-sided victory, it probably a big morale buster.
After midnight on June 5th, Norris ordered his troops to set the campfires alight and then to leave them burning as they retreated towards Cascais. At the break of dawn, the Iberian defenders realized that Norris had abandoned the siege. Archduke Alberto unleashed his cavalry in pursuit, while Admiral de Bazan bombarded the retreating invaders from his galleys. Norris lost more than 500 men on the first day of his withdrawal. On June 6th, the invaders continued their march towards Cascais to rejoin forces with Drake and his fleet. At the same time, the Iberian commander, the Count of Fuentes, assembled a large army and marched towards Cascais too. On June 7th, they found the English protected by strong trenches and by Drake's cannons, roaring from the bay. A direct attack was impractical, so Fuentes and Admiral de Bazan agreed to simply lay siege to the English amphibious force, surrounding them by land and sea. On June 8th, Essex, the restless favourite of the Queen, dispatched a message to the Spanish, challenging them to a pitched battle. Fuentes politely ignored the challenge, as he had some knowledge of a certain skill called strategy. Rather than wasting lives and resources in open combat, on June 9th, the crafty general ordered the destruction of several windmills by the coast, which Drake and Norris had been using to produce flour.
That's like the equivalent of like you get like you challenge someone to a fight and then you like to a sword fight and you riposte. What's it like? You knock the other person's sword out of their hand, and then the other person who lost the sword is like, "Come on, put the sword down and fight me like a man, fist to fist." And they're just like, I'm good, actually. And he just...
flour.
All right.
Windmills by the coast, which
Is that a good analogy? I don't know. I'm losing faith in that analogy.
Drake and Norris had been using to produce flour. Drake's ships were filled to the brim with wheat, but without the mills, it was effectively inedible. On June 11th, Norris scored a promising victory when the garrison at the castle of Cascais surrendered without a fight. It appears that its captain, de Cardenas, had been convinced by 2 Franciscan friars that Lisbon had fallen to Antonio of Crato and resistance was futile. It was not known why 2 Catholic friars had counterintuitively helped the English invaders. What is certain is that Captain Cardenas was beheaded by his superiors. Norris and Drake certainly did not lose their heads. As experienced commanders, they realized that by June 15th, they had little chances to break through the Iberian encirclement and head to Lisbon for a second siege. On that day, the local forces were joined by a strong Portuguese cavalry contingent, as well as 15 galleys under Martin Padilla, King Philip's Secretary of War. Including de Bazan's galleys, Drake was now facing up to 30 well-armed warships. His fleet was numerically superior, but it consisted mainly of transport ships. On June 17th, Drake received a message from a livid Queen Elizabeth, chastising him for not having attacked the Spanish Armada in Santander and for allowing Essex to tag along. Wisely, on the following day, the Drake-Norris expedition left the coast of Portugal, pursued by Padilla and 9 of his galleys. On the night of June 20th, the Spanish galleys rode amidst a formation of English straggling vessels. At daybreak, the English realized too late that the enemy was among them, and Padilla...
That's gotta be a crazy visual to measure, and then this whole fleet just like pulls up beside you.
At daybreak, the English realized too late that the enemy was among them, and Padilla's men went on the attack, releasing artillery and musket volleys. By the end of the engagement, 5 to 7 English vessels had been sunk or set ablaze. Next, the Iberians focused on a land objective, a garrison which Norris had previously stationed at Peniche. A cavalry detachment rushed to Peniche, reaching the town on the 22nd, just when the English were about to leave by boat. The lightning strike resulted in up to 300 losses and the recapture of Peniche's artillery, which proved very handy when Drake's fleet showed up the next day. Repulsed away from the coast, Drake's Armada appeared to be heading towards the Azores, one of their original strategic goals. However, the adverse weather kept pushing the English fleet back towards the Portuguese coast. Running low on water, Drake decided to make a landing in Vigo on June 30th, but the town had been left completely emptied and deserted by its inhabitants. The lack of loot and supplies enraged the invaders, sparking an orgy of destruction. This was interrupted on the following day, when 500 regular Spanish troops, reinforced by local militia, launched a surprise attack, which claimed hundreds of casualties. That was the last engagement of note for the Drake-Norris expedition. Struggling against diseases and hostile weather, the English counter-armada left the Iberian Peninsula for good on July 5, 1589. Despite Drake and Norris's best efforts to market the expedition as a triumph, they could not hide the stark reality of less than triumphal figures. Up to 18,000 men had been lost to fighting, disease, and shipwrecks. Up to 40 vessels had been sunk, burned, captured, or scuttled, and the loot consisted of only £30,000 against the 80,000 contributed by...
How do you try and twist that as a victory? Oh, we won! We did a great service. All right, well, we gave you 80 grand. How much do you have? Well, 30. You lost 18,000 people, a lot of ships, and you have nothing for it. But we made it back. Or I don't know.
Investors. The follow-up to the Spanish Armada had resulted in a disaster of similar, if not greater size, a loss in resources, vessels, and manpower which Elizabethan England could ill afford. The outcome of the expedition reshifted the balance of power to King Philip's side. However, neither the Spanish Armada's attempted invasion of 1588 nor the counter-armada of 1589 could be considered decisive victories on either side, despite contemporary propagandist efforts by both parties. the undeclared Anglo-Spanish War continued to rage on, with further large naval expeditions organized by both belligerents. The conflict was finally concluded on August 18, 1604, with the Treaty of London, which restored the status quo antebellum. Thanks again to Top Troops for sponsoring this video. Get into the massive battles of this new strategy RPG for free via our link in the description.
There's a movie script just begging that you only have to take it from this video. From the, the initial cool engagements in the northern part of Spain. And the woman whose husband apparently died in the siege of that city, and she killed the flag bearer who broke through. And then there was the part where the Spanish guys were like claiming to be like acting Portuguese to get in the middle, and they were like, nope, Trojan horse, and just the good, and then the insert. It's really good. Cool video.
More videos on both English and Spanish history.
Guys, great video. Kings and Generals is an awesome channel. Love y'all. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you learned something or can teach me something down in the comments or answer any of the questions I had. And I'll see you guys next time. We can keep learning. All right. Bye, guys.